My name is Arthur Sterling, and for most of my adult life, I lived in a world of high-rise offices, luxury cars, and exclusive dinner reservations. I built a tech company from the ground up, sold it for a ridiculous sum in my late 40s, and then spent my 50s managing investments, sitting on boards, and generally enjoying the kind of life most people only dream about. I had a penthouse apartment in New York City, a sprawling estate in upstate New York, and a private jet on call. By all accounts, I had made it. But lately, something had been gnawing at me, a kind of hollowness. I saw the world through a tinted window, literally, from the back of a chauffeured car or from 30,000 feet up. I read articles about poverty, about the growing number of people experiencing homelessness in major cities, but it always felt distant, like a problem happening on another planet. I donated money, of course, lots of it, to charities, to foundations, but it felt impersonal. It felt like a transaction, not a connection. One evening, after another particularly soulless charity gala where everyone talked about giving but seemed more interested in showing off their latest designer watch, I had an idea. It wasn't fully formed at first, just a flicker. What if I truly understood what it was like? What if I stripped away everything, every comfort, every dollar, and just lived on the street? Not for a day, not for a weekend, but for long enough to actually experience it. 30 days, a full month. The idea scared me, which meant it was probably a good one. It was utterly insane, of course. My business partners would have me committed. My family would think I finally lost it. But the thought, once it took root, wouldn't let go. It felt like the only way to genuinely understand, to feel something real again. I spent weeks planning, discreetly, of course. I told my assistant Sarah that I was going on a month-long silent retreat to a remote monastery in Nepal, a place with no self-service or internet. She raised an eyebrow, but bless her, didn't question it. I arranged for my financial affairs to be handled automatically. I canceled all my appointments. I even packed an old, worn backpack that I used for hiking years ago. The hardest part was deciding where to go. New York City felt too obvious, too close to home. I wanted to be somewhere I was absolutely anonymous. I settled on Los Angeles, California. It had a large, visible homeless population, diverse neighborhoods, and a climate that wouldn't immediately kill me in November. My preparation wasn't just about logistics. It was about mindset. I had to let go of everything. My identity, my status, my expectations. I had to become nobody. I bought some cheap, worn clothes from a thrift store. Ill-fitting jeans, a couple of old t-shirts, a thick, slightly stained hoodie, and a pair of beat-up sneakers. I stopped shaving for a few days, let my hair get messy. I even practiced walking with a different gait. Less confident, more defeated. It sounds silly, but I wanted to look the part, to truly blend in. The morning I left was surreal. I stood in my penthouse looking out at the glittering cityscape, the coffee still warm in my hand. This was it. The last time I'd see this view for a month. I changed into my homeless clothes, tucked my wallet with just $20 for emergencies, which I swore I wouldn't touch unless it was life or death, and my ID into a hidden pocket, and left my phone with a trusted old friend telling him to only contact Sarah if there was a real emergency. No credit cards, no cash beyond that $20. Just me, the clothes on my back, and a backpack containing a toothbrush, a travel-size soap, a thin blanket, and a small notebook and pen. I took a taxi to LAX, flew coach, a novelty in itself, and then instead of a prearranged car, I took a public bus from the airport into downtown Los Angeles. As the bus rattled along, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Fear of the unknown, exhilaration of the absolute freedom that came with shedding my old life. I got off the bus near Pershing Square. It was early afternoon. The sun was warm, but the city noise was a harsh assault on my ears. People rushed by, heads down, absorbed in their own worlds. I blended in. Or rather, I started to become invisible. My first few hours were disorienting. Where do I go? Where do I sleep? I found myself wandering aimlessly, observing. I saw others like me, huddled in doorways, sitting on cardboard boxes, pushing overloaded shopping carts. I tried to copy them, to understand the rhythm of this new existence. The first night was brutal. The concrete was cold. The city sounds, once a distant hum from my penthouse, were now a constant, grating presence. Sirens, distant shouts, the roar of traffic. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I tried to sleep on a bench, but the cold crept in, and I was constantly on edge. I spent most of the night shivering, clutching my backpack, dozing fitfully only for short periods. The dreams I usually had of business deals were replaced by stark, vivid images of hunger and exposure. When the sun finally rose, casting long shadows across the grimy streets, I felt exhausted, defeated, and utterly, terribly hungry. My stomach ached. I had never in my life experienced true gnawing hunger, not the kind that makes your head light and your body weak. I tried to act natural, to appear like I knew what I was doing, but I was clueless. Where did people get food? I saw some public parks with water fountains, a small victory. The water tasted metallic, but it was better than nothing.
My first real interaction was at a soup kitchen. I had heard about them, of course, but never imagined I'd be standing in line for one. The line was long, stretching around the block. The people in it looked like me, tired, resigned, but also surprisingly, some were laughing, chatting quietly. There was a sense of shared experience, a silent understanding. When I finally got to the front, a kind-faced woman with a hairnet handed me a plate of what looked like stew and a slice of bread. It was the most delicious meal I had ever tasted in my life. Every bite was savored. I sat at a long communal table, trying to make eye contact with some of the other people, but mostly I just ate. The sheer, overwhelming relief of having a hot meal was incredible. The first week was a crash course in survival. I learned about the best spots to sleep, away from direct wind, not too exposed, but also not too hidden where trouble might find you. I learned which public restrooms were reliably open and cleanish. I learned the art of walking, constantly, to stay warm and to avoid drawing attention. I discovered that a surprisingly large part of your day is dedicated to just finding basic necessities: food, water, a safe place to rest. My perception of time changed. Hours felt like days, and days felt like weeks. Every moment was about the present. There was no future planning, no business meetings, no stock market updates, just the immediate, urgent needs of my body. The most shocking thing wasn't the physical discomfort, though that was constant. It was the invisibility. People looked through me. They stepped around me. I was a ghost, a part of the urban landscape that went unnoticed. If I tried to ask for directions, people would often avert their gaze or quicken their pace. It was a profound, chilling realization of how easily a human being can become dehumanized just by their appearance. There were moments of despair, moments where the cold was too much, the hunger too sharp, the loneliness too heavy. I'd find myself curled up in a corner, shivering, tears blurring my vision, wondering what I had gotten myself into. I was tempted more than once to pull out that
$20 and just take a bus to a cheap motel, to call Sarah and admit defeat. But something in me, a stubborn pride or perhaps a deeper need to see it through, kept me going. But there were also moments of unexpected kindness. A woman at a bus stop offered me half her sandwich just because I looked hungry. A street vendor gave me a bottle of water when I looked particularly parched. These small acts, which I would have barely noticed in my old life, felt like monumental gestures of compassion. They were lifelines. I started talking to people. Not everyone, but some. There was an old man named Frank who had been on the streets for years. He taught me about finding discarded newspapers for insulation, about the best times to go to certain food banks, about staying safe. He had a dry wit and a surprising amount of knowledge about the city. He never asked about my past, and I never volunteered it. On the street, your past doesn't matter as much as your present. I met a young woman named Maria, who had run away from a difficult home situation. She carried a small, worn sketchbook and drew constantly. She talked about dreams of going to art school, even though she barely had enough for her next meal. She was resilient, despite everything. Their stories were heartbreaking, but also filled with strength. ingenuity, and a surprising amount of hope. They weren't just the homeless. They were people with complex lives, with dreams, with fears, with moments of joy and laughter. They were just like me, only without the safety net I had always taken for granted. As the days turned to weeks, I started to feel different. My body grew leaner, my skin rougher. My mind felt sharper, stripped of the clutter of my old life. I learned to appreciate the warmth of a weak sunbeam, the sound of a distant bird, the simple act of taking a breath without worrying about the next meeting or the next quarterly report. I also learned to recognize the signs of trouble, which areas to avoid, which individuals to steer clear of. I saw desperation, addiction, and violence up close. It was a harsh, unforgiving reality, far from the polished image I had seen on the news. Towards the end of the third week, the weather took a turn. A cold front moved in, and the nights became truly freezing. Staying warm was a desperate struggle. I saw people getting sick, coughing, their bodies just giving out. This wasn't just discomfort. This was life-threatening. I understood on a visceral level how quickly exposure could kill. One night, I huddled in a doorway, shivering uncontrollably. Frank found me, wrapped me in an extra blanket he somehow procured, and shared his last half of a stale bagel. "Gotta stick together, kid," he mumbled, his breath pluming in the cold air. "Out here, we're all we got." That night, something inside me shifted profoundly. It wasn't just about understanding. It was about connection, about human dignity, about the fundamental need for safety and belonging. I knew with absolute clarity what I had to do when this was over. The 30th day arrived. I marked it in my small notebook, a sense of profound relief mixed with a strange sadness. Relief that the physical ordeal was over, sadness that I was leaving behind the connections I had made and the raw, unfiltered honesty of this existence. I walked to a public park, found a relatively quiet spot, and called my trusted friend. He answered on the second ring, sounding worried. "Arthur, are you okay? Sarah's been going crazy pretending you're meditating, but she knows something's up." "I'm fine, really," I said, my voice hoarse but a huge smile spreading across my face. "It's over. I need you to send the car for me. And tell Sarah I'm okay. Tell her everything." The ride back to my apartment was another shock. Sitting in the plush leather seat, the city lights whizzing by, I felt like a ghost. I looked down at my grimy hands, my torn clothes, and then out at the gleaming buildings. The disconnect was jarring. My apartment was exactly as I had left it. Pristine, quiet, filled with expensive things. It felt alien. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, scrubbing away layers of dirt and grime. But the experience of the last month wasn't so easily washed away. I reunited with Sarah, my assistant, and then with my family. They were, understandably, overwhelmed. Sarah cried, then lectured me for an hour about the stress I'd caused. My family was a mix of anger, relief, and confusion. I sat them down and for hours, I told them everything. Not just the physical hardships, but the lessons, the connections, the profound shift in my perspective. They listened, stunned. The first thing I did after getting some rest was go back to the soup kitchen. I brought Frank a brand new warm sleeping bag and some good quality durable boots. He looked at me, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but no questions. He just nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. I left a considerable donation, not just cash, but a commitment to regular, ongoing support. I found Maria at the park sketching in her notebook. I bought her a new, professional sketchbook and a set of art supplies. This is for your art school dreams, Maria. Don't ever give up on them. I discreetly arranged for an anonymous scholarship fund to be set up for her to cover tuition and living expenses if she got in. She looked at me, her eyes wide open with a mixture of disbelief and hope. My 30 days as a homeless man fundamentally changed me. I couldn't go back to being the old Arthur Sterling, the one who saw the world from a distance. The hollowness was gone, replaced by a deep, urgent sense of purpose. I started by radically rethinking my charitable giving. Instead of just writing checks to large organizations, I began funding smaller, grassroots initiatives. I focused on direct impact, on programs that provided not just shelter and food, but job training, mental health services, and pathways to sustainable housing. I used my business acumen, my connections, and my resources, but with a new understanding. I started a nonprofit foundation, the Invisible City Project, dedicated to addressing the root causes of homelessness in Los Angeles. We worked on innovative housing solutions, job placement programs, and community integration initiatives. I spent less time in boardrooms and more time on the ground, meeting people, listening to their stories, understanding their needs. It wasn't easy. There was bureaucracy, skepticism, and setbacks. But I approached it with the same tenacity I had applied to my tech startup. And this time, the profit wasn't financial. It was human dignity. Years later, the Invisible City project had grown significantly. We had built several transitional housing facilities, established job training centers that connected people with real employment opportunities, and created a network of support services that truly helped people rebuild their lives. We weren't just providing temporary relief, we were helping people find permanent solutions. I still kept in touch with Frank. He eventually got into one of our housing programs and was working part-time at a community garden we helped fund. He still had his dry wit, but now his eyes held a calmer, more peaceful light. Maria, with the scholarship, got into art school and was well on her way to becoming a successful artist, using her experiences to fuel her powerful work. Knowing their stories, seeing their progress, was more rewarding than any multi-million-dollar deal I had ever closed. My life was undeniably different. My penthouse still existed, but I spent more time at the project's offices or out on the streets, talking to people, hearing their stories. My personal relationships were richer too. My family, initially bewildered, now understood and supported my passion. Sarah, my assistant, had become the executive director of the foundation, her sharp mind and compassionate heart perfectly suited for the work. Sometimes, when I'm walking through a bustling city street, I still catch myself looking at the people experiencing homelessness, not just seeing them, but seeing individuals. I see the invisible threads of their stories, the quiet struggles, the moments of resilience, and I remember my 30 days. Those 30 days weren't just an experiment. They were an education. They shattered my illusions, stripped away my privilege, and opened my eyes to a reality I had chosen to ignore. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and the most profoundly transformative. I'm still Arthur Sterling, the millionaire. But now I'm also Arthur, the man who knows what it's like to be hungry, to be cold, to be invisible. The man who learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the connections we make, the empathy we cultivate, and the dignity we help restore. And that, I realized, was the richest life I could ever hope to live.